Hello everyone. I wanted to discuss one part of the nominal ordinal interval ratio classification of levels of measurement that is often less clear than the others. There is no strict, universally agreed upon cutoff in the number of categories at which ordinal data transition into interval data. The distinction between ordinal and interval levels of measurement is more conceptual than numerical, based on the assumptions that can reasonably be made about the data rather than an absolute threshold. However, in practical applications, researchers often follow conventions based on scale properties and statistical justifications. For example, a 10-point scale is still ordinal because the difference between 2 and 3 may not be perceived. Sorry, got an interruption. For example, a 10-point scale is still ordinal because the difference between 2 and 3 may not be perceived as equal to the difference between 8 and 9. However, when a 100-point scale is used, people often assume approximately equal spacing between numbers, making it more acceptable to treat as interval data. Practical rules of thumb: 5 to 7 categories is minimum for treating as interval. I've often seen them analyzed as interval. 10-point scale is often treated as quasi-interval. A 100-point scale is often treated as interval. Statistical justifications: fewer than 5 points is usually treated as ordinal and analyzed as ordinal. 7 or more points is often analyzed as interval. There is debate regarding the classification and proper type of analysis regarding these edge cases. The key takeaway: there is no absolute cutoff, but scales with 7 or more categories are often treated as interval in practice, especially if the assumption of equal spacing is reasonable. The decision ultimately depends on the nature of the data, the construct being measured, and the statistical techniques used. I memorized what usually counts as interval and as interval level data. My fallback things that I always knew were interval were temperature in Fahrenheit or Celsius, and scales that measure psychometric constructs like IQ, anxiety, and depression. So if you see some kind of a psychometric scale, interval should be your first thought. I recently saw calendar years classified as interval. To the extent that they have a different starting point and a 0 point is arbitrary, that makes sense to me. You can have different types of calendars, like the Julian calendar or the Gregorian calendar, or there are Islamic and Hebrew calendars, each with a different starting point. They still measure days, weeks, months, but the numbers are kind of arbitrary. So I'm comfortable calling that interval. So basically, for quizzes and things where you're just answering what's the level of measurement of a variable, if it's got 10 or less categories, then I call it ordinal. And if it's got more than 10 categories, I call it interval for things like quizzes and tests. But for practical application when analyzing data, and we're going to see some examples in our computer assignments, if it's 5 or more categories, it often gets analyzed as interval level data with means and standard deviations. And we'll just have to look at it case by case. But if there's any confusion or debate, it's usually in this area around this cutoff line between ordinal and interval. And I just wanted to give you guys this little piece of nuance because this is always the place where there's discussions and disagreements. Have a good day.